Kill them or kill yourself. No, I won't do that. Leave me alone. Kill them or kill yourself. No, 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 no! Get out of my head! He screamed, but no one heard him as the voice continued its deadly command. Welcome to another episode of Some Stories of Mine and to the series This Happened Here. Today I have one of 3 stories from Tennessee. The other 2 will be presented to you over the next 2 weeks. These are stories that I think a lot of people living here and out of state have never heard about. I was quite surprised to learn of these frightening stories that happened right here in my backyard, and I hope that you will find them as interesting as I did. Now, if traveling around this beautiful country of ours and learning some true but strange and disturbing stories is something that interests you, then click that subscribe button and select all. And while you're at it, go ahead and click the like button. And don't forget to share this video with like-minded people in your group. That would mean so much to me. Up first is a story about one of the first mass shootings ever recorded in the United States, and this happened right here in Knoxville, Tennessee, on one of our most popular streets, Gay Street.
Noon, May 11th, a lone gunman opened fire at a bus stop in downtown Knoxville. When it was over, 3 people were dead. A former mental patient, Robert Daniel Patty, was taken into custody and later arraigned on charges of murder. Patty is now at the Central State Psychiatric Hospital. The case hasn't been prosecuted.
This is a disturbing story, but you know those are the ones I like to share. So without further ado, here is what happened on May 11th, 1976. I'm your storyteller, L.T. Bartek. 44-year-old Korean War veteran Robert D. Patty sat in his second-floor one-room apartment in the Elliott Arms Hotel on Church Avenue in Knoxville, across from the New Sentinel building, holding his head and whispering. The 2 voices would not stop. They were constantly repeating the same command over and over again. Kill them or kill yourself. There was no way to escape them. His head hurt, and his throat was sore from screaming silently to himself. He realized he had his eyes squeezed shut and opened them, looking around his room, hoping to see the voice it had manifested into somebody, anybody, that he could handle. But not this. His eyes caught his army uniform from his time fighting in the Korean War 2 decades ago. He had put his uniform on a hanger and hung it on a nail on the wall to keep as a reminder that he was a survivor. He had endured a lot, and he was still here. He was proud to be a soldier, and he had survived hell and tuberculosis. But after years of struggling, he wondered if he should still be here. But he was not a quitter and knew if he killed himself, he would go to hell. He had already been there and did not want to go back. The war had messed him up. But more than that, his own people, the U.S. Department of Defense, had planted a device in his brain that was now telling him to do bad things. He knew they had tricked him into taking LSD during his army service in California, and also knew that the device he'd invented would guarantee world peace. He had to hide it because he knew they were out to steal it from him. He had written to senators and congressmen asking for government protection, but he couldn't understand why they ignored him. Why did they not believe him? Also, he could not understand why they didn't believe him when he had told doctors about the nerve retrieval system. They had just chalked it down to some kind of disorder and came up with a bunch of bull crap. He didn't believe them. He remembered trying to get help from a few psychiatric hospitals. Finally, he was treated at the Lakeshore Mental Health Institute. He had undergone shock treatment, and when that didn't help, they threw a bunch of pills on him and told him to take them. But he hated those pills. They put him in a fog and he didn't feel like himself. But when the nightmares got bad, he found himself reaching for those pills because they at least dulled the visions and helped him to function some. The voices shouted again, causing him to jump to his feet, holding his head. He crossed the tiny room and stood facing the closet, which held 2 unopened bottles of antipsychotic pills. He opened the door and stood looking at them, but could not push himself to take them. With conservative effort, he turned, trying not to move his head much to keep the pounding in his head at bay, and leaned against the door as if to keep the pills from reaching out to get him, and saw the dresser drawer, where he had a box of bullets to his .33 caliber rifle. He had bought the rifle last week from the Sears store on Central Street. He tore his eyes away and looked to see the deck of cards and the fortune-telling book on his nightstand. He had bought it to see what this life had in store for him, but it gave him no answers. He walked slowly over to a small window and looked out at the late morning sky of May 11th, 1976. At that moment, he knew he had no further strength to fight them. The voices had won. He needed them to stop. He could not go on like this any longer. And then he decided to do what they were telling him to do. The moment he decided, the voices changed to a whisper, which somehow gave him the strength to move to the dresser and load the .30 caliber rifle. Minutes later, he found himself standing in Market Square. The sun was high in the sky and bathed the shop in a beautiful orange glow. It washed over him and warmed his face. Suddenly he felt at peace and his mind cleared. Realizing what he was about to do, he turned to leave. The voice screamed in his head, amplified by 1,000, and he held his head and doubled over. Suddenly he was no longer in control, and the voices now screamed and echoed inside his head. He had to find them. He had to kill them. He needed this to end today. He moved through the lunchtime crowd and watched as people shied away from him as he walked towards Gay Street. He turned the corner and stopped in front of the S.H. Crest department store. He raised his rifle, locking it into the spot just below his elbow, and fired. The 2 women, Desi Rose, who was waiting for the bus in front of the Crest store in the 400 block of Gay Street, waiting for the bus that would take her to visit her husband in the hospital, and Francesca Holmes, a widow who had just left the bank, standing at the bus stop, looked like the manifestation of the voices in his head. He took aim and shot them. But as the crowd dispersed, he thought he saw the manifestation of the voices again in Bruce Brown, a retired TVA auditor on his way to pick up his new eyeglasses. He fired. But the voices didn't stop. He looked around and saw Glorious Laverta Dixon, a 19-year-old schoolgirl on her way to class, hoping that she was the one screaming inside his head. He fired at her as she ran and saw her arm fly up as the shot hit and sunk into her elbow. He turned for the next voice and aimed again and fired at Alma Vandergriff, a 73-year-old walking with her husband. That shot hit her in the leg and she went down. This all happened in 40 seconds. Suddenly there were more voices, and the one coming from outside his head was telling him to drop it. He turned to see Patrolman Jim Lewis, a 41-year-old officer, screaming at him, and then another officer, Knoxville Police Department Patrolman John Faulkner. The rifle fell from his hands and he kicked it away. Then he put his outstretched hands towards Lewis. Lewis asked him where the gun was, and he pointed to it where he had kicked it on the ground. As the officers moved over to pat him down and then grab his arms and place them behind his back, he asked, "Did I kill the sons of bitches?" He needed to know. He hoped he did, 'cause if not, he would not get another chance to get them. As the chaos subsided and he sat in the back of the police car, his mind cleared and he realized what he had done. Remorse hit him like a ton of bricks. He had just killed the very people he had sworn to protect. Saving lives was why he had joined the army, and now he had taken innocent lives because the voices were still with him. As the officers walked him into the prison with tears in his eyes, he asked, "How many people did I waste up there?" They told him 3 and 2 wounded, and that broke him. Patty spent the next 2 years in a psychiatric ward as prosecutors and defense lawyers debated whether he could stand trial. Doctors called his behavior a classic case of paranoid schizophrenia. He could sound reasonably on ordinary topics, even when describing how he had fired 6 times that afternoon. One psychiatrist testified, "He has carried the fear of the disintegration of this universe for at least 22 years, and I'm surprised he is alive today." Patty finally stood trial in September 1978 after a judge found him competent to face a jury. 3 days of testimony ended with a guilty verdict for triple murder. Patty died in prison at the age of 63 in the Mountain City's Northeast Correctional Complex on August 13, 1999, more than 23 years after the shooting. Patty's crime resulted in a significant change for KPD, Knoxville Police Department. The department decided it was time to create its own SWAT team to address any gunman in the future who might pose a threat to the public at large. Well, at least something came out of that. This was a frightening story indeed. Come back next week for another true story about Knoxville, Tennessee. Well, that's all for now, folks. Remember to love yourself and others, and I'll catch up with you on the next one. Take care. Bye.